Ladies and gentlemen, the next session, we'll swiftly move on to the next session, and the next session is an equally important session. And we have a number of speakers join us physically here, and some, of course, a couple of them will join us virtually. The topic is very important. All of us are aware of the impact on the discontinuation of the interbank offer rate provides for Islamic finance industry and the instruments of Islamic finance. Of course, there has been some work that has been done in this space in the transition period, as well as when we're talking about the fallback clauses. The session will focus on these aspects, as well as the work that at present AAOIFI is undertaking in terms of developing and offering a new solution to the Islamic finance industry, a rate which is based, which is primarily based on an Islamic rate that is truly Islamic. And I think there are a whole range of topics will be discussed around the alternative rate. And to chair the session, we have with us Professor Dr. Kabir Hassan, who's joined us, who's a member of AAOIFI Governance and Ethics Board, and he's a well-known academician who's traveled all the way from the US to be with us. So if I can request Professor Kabir to join us on the stage. We're also joined physically by Mr. Ijlal Alwi, CEO of International Islamic Financial Market, who have done a lot of work in this space. We are glad to have Dr. Waleed Hijazi as well with us, Deputy Chairman of AAOIFI Governance and Ethics Board, as well as Managing Partner and Co-Founder at Hijazi and Partners, who's traveled from Egypt. Virtually, we are joined by Mr. Usama Umar, Director and Head of Islamic Financial Markets Product at Standard Chartered. And we are joined by Sheikh Dr. Aznan Hassan, a member of AAOIFI Sharia Board, a well-known personality when it comes to Sharia aspects as well as other aspects. And we are also joined by Dr. Tahir Jyoti, Managing Partner at Al Mali Group, Morocco, who unfortunately has not been able to join us physically here. So with that, I'll leave it to you, Dr. Kabir, to take it forward, inshallah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, welcome to this session, which is IBR transition and the alternate benchmark for Islamic financial institutions. And we do have a distinguished panel who want to discuss the different aspect of it. But before I introduce them to you, let me just give you a sort of background what we will be discussing. And many of them, those are sitting there, not many of them, all of them are distinguished in their own way. So what happened, you know, with the discontinuation of the LIBOR, so there is a need for an Islamic alternative. If you hear about this, this debate has been going on. Mufti Taqi Usmani said that in the doctrine of necessity, we can use LIBOR, a conventional rate, but we need to really find an alternative solution. And that has taken many years, but that recently it has become a necessity that we have to move to an Islamic alternative. Now with this, so Central Bank of Bahrain has always been very helpful through a work of one. There had been an initial discussion between two organizations, AAOIFI and IFFM. And their mandate was to come up with some benchmark formula to be set up by economists, taking view of practitioners, at the same time, governance and the modus operandi to be done by the infrastructure bodies like AAOIFI and IFFM. Now, what has been in that stream of things? So the part one was that for which IFM has been entrusted with to lead is creating market awareness on benchmark reform and impact of transformation of risk-free rate on new and legacy contracts syndicated and bilateral Islamic financial transaction, hedging and capital market securities. And 3 separate work streams have been created for financing, hedging and sukuk. And Mr. Islal Albi is here. He's going to shed light on that. And the part 2 for the AAOIFI to take a lead on development of an Islamic finance alternative benchmark in close collaboration with other infrastructure bodies, including IFSB, IIFM, and developing AAOIFI governance standard on governing how the alternate benchmark will be, how the data will be recorded and used. In addition, standard will include illustration on alternative technical models based on alternative mechanism, based on economic implications. AAOIFI, in line with recommendation of a Sharia board, has proposed IFSB to develop a joint governance standard on this. And AAOIFI will play a leading role in organizing regulators and experts roundtable to deliberate and discuss a possible solution that are acceptable for regulatory application in accordance with the Sharia. So this is little background, and in this distinguished panel, we have 5 distinguished scholars. I would say they are distinguished in their own right. So let me just give you a brief of who they are. We have, what is it? First, we have Aznan Hassan. Aznan, are you with us? Okay. So Aznan Hassan is a professor, but he is also a member of the AAOIFI Sharia board. And also, most importantly, he is the chairman of the Sharia Advisory Council of Security Exchange Commission of Malaysia. Then Aznan has a background in Sharia. He studied in Cairo, and also he has a PhD from the United Kingdom. And Mr. Ijaz Albi, illustrious character, record of 25 years in financial services industry, and is currently heading the Chief Executive Officer, Islamic Financial Market in Bahrain. Then we have Dr. Walid Hegazi. He is the Deputy Chairman of the AAOIFI Governance and Ethics Board. He is also managing partner and co-founder of Hegazi and Partners Egypt. He is a Harvard Law graduate, by the way. He has both master's and PhD from Harvard Law School. Then we have Osama Omar. He is the Director and Head of Islamic Financial Products, Standard Chartered Bank, Sadiq, United Arab Emirates, a long history of Islamic finance industry. And finally, we have Dr. Ahmed Tahiri Juti. He is, of course, a PhD holder. He is the managing partner of Al Mali Group based in Morocco. So with this brief introduction, I want to ask Dr. Aznan Hassan the first question: what will be the challenge of Islamic financial institutions after phasing out LIBOR? What would be the role of Islamic finance standard setting bodies like AAOIFI and IFSB could play? By the way, just the ground rule, there will be 2 series of questions. Each panelist will get 5 minutes and 5 minutes, so 10 minutes. And I will show some sign, and there will be hard stop because we are given only 75 minutes, and we'll have 15 minutes for question and answer. So, Brother Aznan, so keep this time in mind, and you have 5 minutes to answer this question, please.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Kabir. Thank you, all the panelists. I have to make my time very, very fast now. I have 5 minutes and have to take my breath as well in talking. Thank you, AAOIFI, for having me to give my point of view on the transition from IBOR to new rates, risk-free rate, whatsoever we call it. As we all know that coming next year, the LIBOR will be discontinued, as after the discontinuation of LIBOR, people are looking into various alternatives to this particular LIBOR. I mean, government and regulators are looking into what we call risk-free rate for that matter. But the problem with risk-free rates that is proposed, whether it is SOFA or SONIA or whatsoever potential new benchmark pricing that to be used, they are actually backward-looking overnight reference rates as compared to LIBOR or IBOR, which is a forward-looking base. So from Sharia point of view, when it comes to that particular situation, for us to restructure some of the Sharia-based contract which need to be where the price need to be determined upfront, like murabaha, like ijarah, for example, we may have sort of problems, and if we want to continue or we want to use the backward-looking kind of what we call pricing, then we have to do some modification, for example, as proposed by IFM, for example, on some of their restructuring of the way on how for us to do murabaha and how to do ijarah within the backward-looking mechanism as compared to the forward-looking as we have in LIBOR before. So coming from that particular angle, you see there are two approaches when it comes to what we should do moving forward. The first approach is try to adopt with the potential risk-free rates to be offered by the regulators. Even though it is backward-looking, there are some what we call modification need to be done in terms of how we calculate the rate and everything to still suit the practice of risk-free rate that we have. While this particular practice is acceptable from Shariah point of view, at least endorsed by many scholars for that matter, there are another approach which I believe that we should work toward it now, which is actually to find the alternative benchmark rate for Islamic finance for that matter. For all this while, even though we have used or we have utilized the conventional benchmarking, LIBOR, SIBOR, whatever board that you have in this world, however, we don't forget one thing, the Fiqh Academy of Jeddah, even though allowing for us to use the conventional benchmark, did for a very long time ago suggest that we propose for Islamic alternative benchmark rate. And I believe that with this continuation of LIBOR or IBOR for that matter, is a very timely time for us to look into that particular angle. That's where some of the regulators or some of the what we call the standard setting bodies like IOFI, ISB, and also to a certain extent IFM, Ijlal, if he says also today, try to look into finding what are the alternative benchmark rate that potentially can be proposed for us to adopt. So to answer your first question is that what are the role to be played by this standard setting body? I believe we can play a very important role for that matter. IFSB, for example, has been considered or is one of the main standard setting body for the Islamic banks in the world globally. So I believe that IFSB should come fast with the IOFI or other standard setting body if we can loop in some of the regulators, for example, that apply Islamic finance heavily into this particular discussion that can help us to put forward an alternative benchmark as an alternative to the conventional benchmark that we have. That's the first thing to do. I think we all in this particular what we call committee for that, I think we have to move fast for that matter. That's the first one. Second one is that what are the main challenges? Okay, looking from the proposal that we can see, there are a lot of, until now, there are a lot of potential, what I call alternative benchmarks put to the market. For example, some propose the interbank financial market benchmark. IFM, for example, proposed that. There are some proposed Islamic interbank financial market benchmark. Some propose real economics, which I myself wrote a paper on that with my brother, Dr. Anwar. We wrote a paper on how for us to use the expected GDP, for example, for us to benchmark or to propose what we call the proposal benchmark rate, for example. Some goes on the asset pricing, commodity pricing, and some other benchmark rate that has been proposed to replace the conventional. But what are the challenges in implementing or in proposing this particular benchmark? The first one is that we have to understand that when LIBOR was discontinued, the discontinuation of LIBOR was mainly because of four main reasons. The first one is that because of subjectivity of the no transaction, which is not transaction based, not sufficient transaction to calculate, for example, skeptical to ringing and manipulation, and also based on expert judgment for that matter. So when we have to do Islamic, we have to consider this particular four reasons for us not to fall in that particular trap. That's the first one. Second challenge is when it comes to regulators, one important thing that we have to understand for us to persuade the regulators to adopt our way of calculation, the benchmark rates is also very important. Why? Because I believe that it's very difficult for a country or a state, even though I know some people believe that can be done. In my personal opinion, I believe it is very hard for a particular jurisdiction to have more than one benchmark, one Islamic and one conventional. It is very difficult for that to happen. So how for us to convince the regulator that the benchmark that we are proposing is actually more beneficial compared to a pure interest-based benchmark to be proposed by what we call risk-free rate, for example, for that matter. How for us to be able to convince the regulator that our real economics, proposed real economic benchmark that we are going to propose is not only good for the country, but also good in pricing the rate for the financing product in the country, be it Islamic or conventional. I think these are the two main important challenges that we need to look at within this very short time that I have for us to be able to propose and move forward in terms of proposing what I call alternative rate of benchmark when it comes to Islamic financial transaction in countries that apply Islamic finance, for example, for that matter. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Dr. Aznan, for your very interesting and decisive and very careful answer to my question. Actually, I had another question, I already answered it, but since you already answered the second question, I want to ask, you are proposing one rate in a system where there's dual banking system. Now,
Yes.
the question is, how do you deal with the situation? Like, not a single country except Iran, which is Islamic. I mean, the entire banking system Islamic.
What I intend to have is that, I mean, if there is a study in one country looking into the level of Sharia compliant transaction, what I call Islamic transaction, Islamic finance transaction countries, there are countries which are heavily moving toward Islamic. Even some countries, there is more than 50% Islamic already, some of their transaction. Okay, so what my thinking is that if we go to the regulators, the benchmark that we should put to regulators is a benchmark that is beneficial for both Islamic and conventional. So whether it is Islamic or conventional, because this is a benchmark which go on real economic basis, whether you go by expected GDP or real GDP for that matter, or asset pricing based on commodity, for example, because the rate is neutral in nature. So it is not because it is Islamic, whether it is conventional, it is the rate that capture the real economic growth of the country. So this is not only beneficial from Islamic point of view, but also beneficial for the countries. So whether you are Islamic or conventional, this sort of benchmark should be looked very seriously by the regulators in ensuring that whatever you do, Islamic or conventional, the benchmark that you use can be implemented in both situations. So don't look from Islamic point of view, only looking from the real economics benchmark point of view, which is beneficial for both Islamic, and it's neutral in nature, it's beneficial for everybody for that matter. If you do Islamic or conventional, this can be practiced in the country. That's my thinking of this particular benchmark.
So excellent answer. So you are basically referring to economy-based model, like you have written a paper for Anwar Uthman, your student, and also there is a paper from ISDB Institute by Dr. Sami and his team. So they're basically talking about economy-based model. So excellent. So you think that we really need to go to the what is the basic benchmark, which is good for both industry, even though we are operating a dual banking system. Thank you very much. So that brings to me our next panelist, Dr. Izaz Albi. And Dr. Albi, you have been involved with this IBOR, that instrument that was created by Thomson Reuters many years ago, along with a team. And this IBOR was also based on contribution type of technique, where you take the 11 o'clock, they take 16 banks, they offer their rate, and they take out 25% up and down, and they sort of concessions rate. Again, subjectivity is there, But that Islamic IBOR did not last very long, or it did not really get traction in the market. Now, your organization, I followed very seriously. Actually, IIFM has done excellent job in creating template for different sukuk structure. And actually, I use that in my own research and study. But when we come to this benchmark that you are heavily engaged from day one, so there's a collaboration, you know that, and you started with 2019 with AAOIFI. Now the transition to a risk-free rate, and we already come up with 4 different benchmark. Could you please shed light on these things so that the audience can understand and how that can be an alternative?
Sure. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I think my voice is coming, is it? All right.
Your wife?
No, voice.
Oh, voice. I said wife. I thought the wife is coming.
So I can be heard. That's what I meant. Anyway, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And really pleasure to be here, and thankful to AAOIFI for inviting me on this subject. And the subject is such that we can take hours to discuss both elements. Of course, there is an element of global benchmark reforms, which I will cover, and the other subject which is closer to heart also for many years. I mean, IFM looked at it for more than 12 years now or more on the Islamic benchmark. Of course, there are challenges, but now the timing and all, so this Alhamdulillah issue has come. And looking at what you mentioned about earlier with the Thomson Reuters, and we didn't take part in that one. The main reason was the methodology. So that was the main thing, and we know methodology was very closer to what the LIBOR had, and time doesn't allow me to go into those details, but naturally that's why global regulators decided to discontinue with the LIBOR, and they worked since 2013. Financial Stability Board, ISCO, and Basel Committee, they have been working on the global benchmark rate reforms and discontinuation of LIBOR. And also later on, the UK Financial Conduct Authority also in 2017 decided that they will not really compel the banks to submit those summations for LIBOR. So that was basically, we see now the end of the LIBOR. And there are two elements which we have to see. One element is, of course, the Islamic rate, which Dr. Aznan, and he's also on our Sharia board. So he mentioned, and that is something we are part of it. The other one is that when you are, especially for our industry is also cross-border in nature. In many jurisdictions, you have to have, transactions in the major currencies like dollar or sterling or euro or Japanese yen in particular. Naturally, those rates are now work has been done. And if you don't really work towards really applying those rates, then many Islamic contracts, especially in the syndication side, in the Murabaha or Ijara, and some contracts, they will come into difficulty how to continue. And our aim is to really, the industry should progress while we are working on the Islamic rate. And that's when we decided in last year, in 2020, we held our very comprehensive consultative meeting. These days, the world is virtual, and we had a participation about 180 odd participants from about 20 countries, where we presented our white paper. And you rightly mentioned that is the paper which we published with the contributions of a number of institutions. AAOIFI from the accounting side was also mentioned there, what can be done. And we work very closely with AAOIFI, so we coordinate things, and we see what each other are doing. And we just sort of decided that we, IFM, given our market focus, will work on the global benchmark reforms and see how those things can be implemented, the risk-free rates or the alternative rates. And if you look at it, the main sort of issues which one has to overcome, and the paper gives you a very good examples also. So I mean, it's available on our website, and sure it's been referred. The main issue with the new rates, they are backward looking. So you have a calculation methodology which is different. So these are daily rates now, and I will cover the the forward looking what is coming. So I will cover that briefly if time allows, inshallah. Then you have term structures which are generally not there. in that. You don't have a credit premium, which is there in the new rates now, especially for secured for the SOFR for dollar, or Sonia for sterling, and these they have named Tonia for Japanese yen, and these. So you don't have, and then the timing previously, and the why I think Thomson Reuters other issue was that it was not really, submissions from the banks were from different places. In LIBOR, actually, whether we call it good thing or whatever, it is, timing wise consistent, right? So you had those sort of consistency that is available at the same time. So when you are booking any transaction, for example, Ijara or Murahaba for syndicated, you need sort of these rates available. Naturally, if they're not available, there is an issue in booking because it's not available, it will appear at a later time. So these sort of challenges which led us to work on finding the solution. Of course, banks already had solutions, and you rightly mentioned our aim is to unify so that we don't really work for these documents or areas, and of course AAOIFI, IFSB do the same. That we have a unified solutions which are being sort of discussed among the Islamic banking community, and then have one or two options which will be available to institutions, because this transition is happening, and looking at things, it's still evolving. These solutions still will be there. There are two parts of it, what we did. One is on the financing side, which we have already published, and those sort of solutions give two options for the Muraba and two options for the Ijara. Right. If you look at the option for Murahaba, for example, there is one long dated, and then I'm not going to go in details, and then Murahaba for the profit. And these are generally used for syndicated market for long term because you have rate changing. And AOFI 59 also, now you have to apply that. So you have that, and one structure is ceiling, which is used in Malaysia for some years now, and it has a regulatory backing also. It works because generally if you have a high rate, corporate will have issue and all how to agree, but the Malaysian have developed. So our Sharia board and we in our consultation we took that one also, and that one also been approved. So you have the institutions have options if they want to use either the two. They both are very workable and approved by Sharia, and when we are consultation we had a number of institutions working with us. And then we have two sort of solutions for the Ijara. Now, those are sort of Ijara are something which one can see. There are some technicalities, but I don't have time to go into those details. I will not. But what one has to look at, in terms of, there are two elements which I want to just share, which are important. One is now you have sort of, solutions for risk-free rates or alternative benchmark rates, as they call. They are coming out with some, spread adjustment, which regulators are allowing to have a term rate. So that is, and it is forward-looking, but still our assessment and talking to the industry, you'll still need those solutions which we have produced to be still used. So certain transactions, certain bank will still use those, risk-free rate, because you don't have a credit premium. So certain banks will still like to cover credit premium. For example, I had a call from one of the UK banks, Islamic, for the mortgage side. They wanted to use and they wanted to see how that really works. So we see that. Other thing is that, in our sort of, when we do standards, and all of us do the same, AOFI or FSB, creation of transparency is very important. And we sort of looked at it that these term rates for risk-free rates are based on, methodology of compounding. And compounding is a very sensitive word in Islamic finance. See, so the moment you say, it's compounding, and we have, alhamdulillah, about 12 scholars on our board also, it, rings the bells that there is some, it's compounding. How come the Islamic isn't compounding? So we clarified it, and AOFI have standard 27 on indices, if you refer that. This is merely a benchmark till inshallah the Islamic comes. So even if you have a compounding, but still use the as a benchmark. So there is no compounding should be impact on your principal when you are calculating a profit. So that should not be there. But the rate, if they are going to use this forward-looking rate, then the compounding, is merely as a benchmark. It should be referred as that.
So related to your deliberation, I just have a question. Islamic financial product is different than conventional financial product. So all the techniques that we are using is basically a clone of conventional, like for example, forward-looking, the new instrument the Western world coming up with. They're using very esoteric mathematical, you cannot really avoid it from mathematical standpoint. My question is, can there be a risk-free rate in Islamic finance? When you talk about benchmark, so like Dr. Raznan mentioned that if it is something this based on the real sector of the economy, but there is a problem with the data, and there is a problem with your structure as well, because you have to depend on the transaction-based data. Now, how you are managing that? And Islamic finance market product are very thin. The data is not there. So how are you managing that in your structure? The four structure they propose.
Structure is simply, and I will also like to mention, there's one element. The financing side, you needed a solution because generally they use, either the backward-looking rate. So what you do is, and I'll cover the other one on the hedging, which we are finalizing now, inshallah, and we'll be publishing very shortly. That you are taking this sort of a risk-free rate, whatever rate has come, let's say, 2%, and then the banks are basically going to sort of add, either credit premium or certain buffer or certain spread on that, which they have to see. Even if you see, the difference, if you have a contract, for example, which use the LIBOR as a benchmark, and let's say LIBOR was 3. And now what they call risk-free rate, of course, they're driven by, as repo rate or, liquid, deposit rates, whatever they are doing in this, and we have to, for now, use that. So when you are sort of looking at this aspect of sort of bringing in sort of, this spread and all, then naturally that buffer and all allows the bank to sort of negotiate. So that's how we are sort of, that is being proposed there to tackle that issue. So it's not really based on data. It's more of your sort of, what the, they adjust the spread. Let's say LIBOR, like I mentioned, 3 and, risk-free rate 2. So there's spread adjustment they make, which is internationally in forward also, they're doing the same, is making that adjustment. So the rate itself come out to be the same. So in the contract, there is not a change. Of course, last point, which I just want to very quickly mention, in certain sort of, as our hedging standards, what we have developed and our master agreement has been widely used globally, alhamdulillah. And whatever we produce with our consultation, we didn't have to review. So in our master, we didn't have to review anything. In our sort of product level, let's say for the currency hedging or, hedging for profit rates, between fixed and floating, these are plain vanilla risk mitigation. So you don't really, we didn't have anything sort of mentioned, to amend those. But at the product level, you have to sort of see, what you need to do. And there we discovered that most of the products are using backward looking. So you don't do any solution. What we are going to publish very shortly, inshallah, is a booklet on the IBOR definitions, a booklet for that. So defining these 4, 5, 6 currencies, when you're making a contract, what you have to do. So giving the institutions that when they're using, then they can use that booklet to, make amendments when this rate changes. And other one would be unified sort of clauses for bilateral agreements. Our industry is small, so naturally we can't make it into a protocol type.
One of the problem that I feel as an academician, when you try to do any empirical work in the Islamic finance, in basically money market or capital market, the paucity of data, we cannot do anything. Now, having said this, the mandate that has been given, and actually I'm the working group chairman of this IBOR. So we are dealing with multiple areas, multiple models. And we have a very good consultant, Dr. Salman Sheikh, has written the basic paper. Now we find out whatever we propose, intellectually consistent, based, because one of the mandates of the AAOIFI governance ethics would come up with a economic based model. And what Mr. Ijaz Albi is saying is about financial markets model. That's fine. Probably because my understanding, in order to make a practical, operable benchmark, it will take years. One of the reasons with all its deficiency, LIBOR exists so many years because it's practical, it's easy to calculate and so on. And IBOR was based on this, but for practical reasons, various reasons, it did not exist. Now the question is, we have to come to a real economics model. If I remember, Taqi Usmani, is an eminent jurist in the world, he said there's a doctrine of necessity. Islamic finance industry is 50+ years old now. How long will play the doctrine of necessity? We really need to do something that we can claim of our own. Having said this, that brings my next question to Dr. Walid Hagazi. So Dr. Walid, what will be the challenges of Islamic financial institution after phasing out of LIBOR? How could it set Sharia-based alternative reference rate for different Islamic financial products based on underlying contracts used? Or is it necessary to consider the underlying Sharia contracts used and their nature in determining the Islamic alternative reference rates?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, our great audience. Before I answer the question directly, I think we gotta review the existing Sharia opinions regarding the use of benchmarks, interest-based benchmarks in Islamic finance. We can categorize those views into 3 categories. The first viewpoint, they say that the use of any interest-based benchmark as permissible by way of necessity or other, as Dr. Kabir just mentioned, the position of Dr. Taqi Usmani, and this is, I think, the overall and prevailing position in Sharia. And they see that this is, in fact, a way to avoid having gharar, which is the speculative risk-taking in Islamic financial transactions, because using a benchmark allows, at least for fixed income instruments such as leasing and murabaha, for example, allow you at the outset of the transaction to avoid taking that risk and to know how to price the transaction. As LIBOR is a forward-looking or forward-facing interest rate-based benchmark, that fulfilled the gharar issue from their perspective, at least that you are limiting gharar by knowing the mechanism of calculation at the outset of the transaction. However, when used in Islamic finance, LIBOR, the forward-looking benchmark, isn't actually the interest rate itself. So that's the position here. It is just a reference to that interest rate. So we're not saying we're going to charge on this murabaha transaction LIBOR plus, let's say 5%. No, we're saying that we're using LIBOR as a reference in it, and the return or the cost plus is calculated based on LIBOR plus this amount or this interest rate, percentage, additional percentage, that's the spread. So that's the argument that is prevailing. And the second viewpoint, which, as you can guess, sees this as using the benchmark is impermissible in the context of Islamic finance because it imitates conventional financial instruments, and it forces the Islamic financial instrument to perform and act like and produce the same results as the interest rate-based instruments, which we are all trying to avoid in the first place. So they see this as a hila, charging to charge interest in practice, but calling it something else. The third viewpoint, which is more practical, and actually it's more relevant for us today, which is the view that even if you're using the benchmarks, existing interest-based benchmarks today, the industry need quickly to come up with its own benchmarks derived from profit or market-based actual performance of assets-based rates that could be used for Islamic financial institutions. So the existing Sharia compliant models can generate options for Islamic Islamic benchmarks. So, a benchmark for example, sukuk, mudaraba sukuk transaction, a benchmark for leasing transactions. So there could be additional versions of the Islamic benchmark. So these are the views that we have from a Sharia perspective. And that tells us really the story of the transition that we are facing today and how we should approach it. If you are following the viewpoint that an interest rate-based benchmark is okay as long as it is acceptable by the regulator, because it's only a measuring methodology or a measuring tape or a reference, then you really don't need to do anything. You just wait until the conventional central banks and markets adopt another, a new benchmark, which could be either backward looking or a forward looking, depending on how this is going to develop. I think I see the situation now going to too much criticism of the backward looking mechanism. So it could lead actually to a forward looking mechanism, but based on actual performance of historical rates. So if you believe of the first view, then you really don't need to do anything. When the markets adopt whether a backward looking or a forward looking rate, you will, as Islamic financial institutions, you will adopt it. The problem here is that if it is a backward looking rate, I think even those scholars who allowed using the benchmark, which are existing today, the interest-based LIBOR, which is a forward-looking rate, will have a problem with the backward looking benchmark, because obviously it is based on previous performance, but it will only be known in arrays of the calculation period. So at the end of the day, you didn't avoid the gharar. In fact, the transaction will be inherently full of gharar. So even that first view, the tolerating view, will actually change or may change if the international markets adopt a backward-looking benchmark. If the situation develops into using a forward-looking benchmark, then I think the first group will be happy with that. The second group of scholars who are against using a conventional benchmark based on interest rates will continue to voice their objections. And obviously the third group as well will encourage the industry to find its own rates, which lead to answering the second part of your question, which is what should we use? What could be the alternative for Islamic RFRs or Islamic alternative rates? I think definitely I am with the previous speakers in encouraging using a market-based, a profit-based, real economy-based rate. However, this needs a lot of work, and I have not seen enough papers, enough work that has been written on the subject to actually allow us to move directly at this transition point when the LIBOR expires at the end of this year. So this will be work in progress. And the challenge would be, what do we do until that rate is developed? I think this is a challenge facing the industry. I think there would be a transitional period where many institutions and many regulators will push institutions to adopt, obviously, whatever global markets will adopt at the end of this year. One or two rates, I think, obviously, two rates would be better than one. One rate towards the fixed income instruments, such as murabaha and leasing, and another rate for the sukuk based on profit and loss sharing. And even that is not ideal, because we all know that fixing a rate as an expected or estimated rate for profit and loss sharing instrument is not an ideal situation, and it is done only by way of exception. The real situation is that you should have an actual return based on the actual performance of the assets. And even if you have to, for practicality reason, agree on an expected rate, there has to be a fallback, there has to be an adjustment done at each of the calculation period.
Thank you, Dr. Walid. Islal, you want to add something?
Yes, very quickly. 2 points. One is, the sukuk market is not really affected because we had a working group and we looked at it, because they're not using, these LIBOR anymore. It used to be many years ago when there were floating rates and all sukuk. They're all moved towards the fixed rate. Yes, they still use other benchmark in the conventional, like mid swaps and all. So that is, something which we should keep in mind when these global benchmark. Other point is that which is important for this transaction and fallback clauses. That's something which we are doing. Is look at your sort of legacy contracts, and some contracts really allows you, and some contract doesn't allow. That's why you have for till June 2023. You have leeway to basically continue to use that agreed rate, which is generally LIBOR in cases. So I think Islamic institutions have to be, since we are still working on the Islamic rate, and it will inshallah will come about. Of course, it will take time. So we have to see, your contract sort of need to be also amended. And that should be kept in mind.
That's where the real problem will start. I mean, when it comes from repricing, how do you do this? Having said this, actually, as an economist, I face this problem when you make this statement backward looking and forward looking. Now, data is in the past, data is not in the future. So if you want to calculate a rate today, you use different econometric technique to get the data based on the past today. And if I issue a contract and use that one, that is fine. So it is less Gorer, to be honest with you, than you are using future rate, because future is full of Gorer. You do not know what's going to happen. And you are doing the same technique, yanking back into the present. So actually, I mean, we have to be careful using the word backward looking and forward looking. That is my understanding. Having said this, you mentioned something, Dr. Walid, and also Dr. Islal. So like forward looking and backward looking. Osama, you are there? Can you hear me?
I just also have to keep in mind for currencies.
Hello.
I think you have two currencies.
Okay, sure. Osama, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Kabir, I can hear you.
Okay. Osama, so now your turn. Could you please answer this question again, forward looking, backward looking? What is the issue with backward looking rate in Islamic finance? Can they be made forward looking? If the term based forward looking rates are available in alternative reference rates, then they effectively become like LIBOR, but they are transaction based. Would it be feasible to use term based forward looking risk-free rate in Islamic finance?
Thank you, Dr. Kabir. First of all, I would like to thank IOFI for giving me the opportunity to be part of this forum. It's an honor to be part of this panel alongside with the leaders of Islamic finance. So, I mean, focusing on the issues with the backward-looking rate, I would like to start with the statement that backward-looking rates are inherently incompatible with most Islamic structures, if you see. So the way the Islamic commodity Muraba contracts or Ijara contracts are executed, the prices or rents are fixed upfront, whereas in the in this part of benchmark reforms, the new mechanism is to settle the rate at the maturity of the transaction or at the end of the calculation period. So one of the biggest challenges we face with this issue is coming up with the product structure which are compatible, redesigning the Muraba contracts or Jara contracts so that we can use the backward looking rates. And while there is a lot of work has been done by various industry bodies or IFM has an extensive work with the engagement of market participants, I still feel that it would be very difficult to achieve sort of standardization as we have seen in case of LIBOR, where obviously the mechanism is widespreadly used. So there are certain evolving regulatory situation, implementation of AAOIFI Sharia standards in UAE and Bahrain, and obviously there are certain views from BNM. To give you some example, that how these contracts will be amended and how these will be implemented in future with the clients. So achieving standardization is the biggest issue I see with the backward looking rate. Um, the other issue which is I feel is very important is explaining these new rates and pricing mechanism to the clients. And we have seen in certain cases where we talk about GBP exposures where the deadline to migrate into new rates has already been passed, and there have been some conversation with the clients, and we see a lot of uh, issues. The clients are struggling to understand what's going on. I think we need to a lot of focus on explaining on how the new contracts would look like, new pricing would look like. So this is again, it's a big issue with this structure. Implementation and execution, I would like to highlight as another issue, because there's a lot of work has been done on redesigning the bank infrastructure, updating the systems, updating the contracts, taking finance opinions, tax opinions, that how these will impact, and obviously Islamic with a more complexity, because obviously there are underlying asset backed contracts governing the whole structure, which is obviously has been a big challenge. And I think another last point which I see as an issue is the awareness and communication. So there's a lot of work, like I said, the IFM has done engaging with the market participants, but another side of communication is engaging with these working groups also, like ARC, which is the USD Labor working group, or engagement with GBP, to communicate them that the Islamic contracts are different. There are obviously there are challenges, and we cannot just as it is adopt them and implement them in the execution phase. We have some recognition of that in the GBP working group, which is called Sterling Working Group, that they have in their publications identified Islamic banking or Islamic finance as a challenge in terms of adoption of overnight rate. But uh, but the larger exposures for Islamic banks which are impacted are under USD, under USD as a currency, which is obviously there has been no communication as such. So we are sort of forced to adopt the structures to meet the backward-looking mechanism. So that is the first part of the questions regarding the issues. And when you're talking about moving away from backward looking rates, we have certain options available in forward looking, right? You have fixed rate financing as an alternate, but it comes with its own challenges, right? There is an exposure that treasuries will have to run because of the inherent floating rate movements to offer such solution to the counterparties. There is a rate published by Bloomberg, which is called BISB, which slightly tracked, and it's a forward-looking rate. It's tracked the LIBOR. There are some recommendations from the counterparties or participants in the banking sector, especially that let's look at as an alternate option. Then there are term SONIA and term SOFR rates also available, which have been published by third parties like Refinitiv or CME Group. So these are the options available, but it will remain to be seen that how feasible it will be to use it on widespread basis. I mean, it's very difficult to make a judgment at this point in time, unless, as we're still going through the transition phase, unless we reach certain degree of transition, then we'll be in a position to comment that what is a better choice for Islamic. There are pros and cons on our both sides. One of the pros in which we feel as an organization also, that it will sort of give boost to the Islamic finance as an industry. Because if collectively speaking, Islamic banks try to push for term rates, and it's very easy to comprehend compared to the risk-free rate on the conventional side also. So there could be we could see potentially a migration of clients moving away from conventional finance and opting for Islamic finance. But I mean, this is all our views, but it still remain to be seen how it really concludes, and we will know, we'll have that clarity in next couple of years, hopefully.
While you are on this subject, just want to ask you, what sort of problem you foresee for Islamic financial institution opting for LIBOR at least until 2023, when some LIBOR rates will still be available? What elements should be there in legacy documents, as Islal Albi mentioned, and fallback language to avoid such confusion, disputes, and ensure seamless transition?
Okay, so on this point, I think we need to understand that we have to segregate currencies. For instance, for GBP exposures, the deadline has already passed. So we need to use alternate reference rate for, and we need to use
I think we lost him. Okay, I see Mustafa Adil on audience. Is Mustafa here? Can somebody give him the mic? I want to ask him a question because he was involved with IBOR. And I have a question. We are thinking about all these different things. Of course, thanks to Mr. Islal Albi, IFM, they come out at least 4 reference rate. But do you think that this pure Islamic alternative or financing benchmark rate, a central authority should really generate this number? For example, the central, I mean, every government have this discount rate. So that discount rate is done by the central bank, I mean, central government. So I'm just asking from your experience from the industry work and with the big data. And of course, you're talking about all these rates about data. Now, Bloomberg data, are the Islamic finance data that deep? I thought that they are very thin. As far as data is concerned, it's the money market, Sukuk data is there, but banking data is there, but the data that you need in order to find out alternative benchmark rate, I mean, that is not existent. So just please quickly answer your question before I go to Dr. Juti.
Sure. No, thank you, Professor Kabir, for the question. And as you rightly mentioned, Refinitiv was involved with the Islamic IBOR rate that was launched many years ago. And there was various challenges that we faced with that, which were highlighted as well earlier today. But to your point about central authority, one of the key things that we felt was missing was having a central authority that was going to be issuing it across geographies, because the particular dynamics of each geography are different. And I think that has to be factored into the equation when you look at that. Now, obviously, globally, we've moved away from the methodology of contributions, right? Contributions is no longer considered to be an acceptable methodology when you're looking at a benchmark rate, because it's open to manipulation. The industry is moving towards actual transactions. When we talk about risk-free rates, when we look at the developed markets, what they're looking at is that it's not really a risk-free rate per se, but they want a true opportunity cost rate, right? And the reason that they look at the risk-free rate, they refer to it like that, is because if I, as a financial institution, have excess liquidity and have no avenue to invest that, then the natural avenue that I will take is overnight placement with the central bank, right? So that is deemed to be the immediate opportunity cost, barring any other investment opportunity. And I think whatever Islamic benchmark rate we adopt, we have to keep that in consideration. Now, in the working group, we looked at whether we should have a rate that is linked to real economic activity, whether we should have a rate that is linked to inflation, whether we should have a rate that's linked to zakat, all with this purview of what is the opportunity cost? What is the cost of your capital that you are facing, that you have to generate a return in excess of? And I think all of them can be valid. And in addition, we also explored financial rates that could be utilized for short-term tenors. But from our experience, it is critical to have the regulatory authorities on board, because their direction is going to drive adoption in local markets. it is critical not to go for a global rate, because a global rate does not really serve the purpose of the local market. So you need to have localized rates in those jurisdictions. And whether you go for an economically backed rate or whether you go for a financially calculated rate, and even with the calculation, you have to look at the interest rate swaps to project forward-looking rates, right? So there is a Sharia consideration, I would say, with how valid that is. But I think whether you go for the economic calculated rate or whether you go for a financially calculated rate, it is critical to localize it to the local market, and it is critical to have a central authority that is going to drive adoption.
Okay, thank you. One last, just one in one sentence. So what is about data?
The level of data within Islamic finance is limited when you're calculating forward-looking rates. It's widely available to calculate overnight rates, to calculate backward-looking rates. The data is very broadly available, so that's not an issue. And the volumes are there as well. To calculate forward-looking rates, you would have to look at the conventional derivatives market to do that forward calculation ratio and then apply it to the current overnight rate, which is calculated based on Islamic money market transactions. So it's not perfect, but you can use it as a reference point and then apply it to actual Islamic transactions. So there is that validity there that exists.
Thank you, Mustafa Adil. Now, Dr. Ahmed Tahiri Jyoti, I know you
Dr. Kabir, I'm back online. Sorry, Usama here, I'm back online. If I could finish the response to the question, yeah?
Oh, sorry, Usama.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, sorry, Usama.
Yeah, apologies.
Realize it, okay.
So I was just, quickly summarize. I am conscious of the time constraint here. I'm just quickly summarize the response of the questions asked. Actually, so I just wanted to highlight that GBP currency benchmark has already been discontinued, in a sense that new contract that is going beyond 31st of December 2021 has to reference alternate reference rate. So in GBP transactions, we are already there. In terms of USD transactions, yes, you're right. We could see that the market participants are reluctant to use RFRs or ARRs right now, and they're still inclined to use labor-based transactions, although the regulatory guideline around it is to to migrate into the references as early as possible. So that we see as a trend, that is correct. In terms of having the relevant provision in the fallback, relevant clauses in the fallback provisions, I think there are two important areas there which impacts Islamic contracts as such. One is what happens when the rate discontinues, the labor discontinues, so which is sort of at par with conventional, because you need to identify what would be the alternate rates. So it could be Sonia, Super, whatever it is. So that you need to make a note of. The important point which is specific to some contracts is that how do you capture the change in structure, because once the rate goes away, it impacts the way you do the commodity transaction or Java transaction. So you need to make some reference of these in the fallback provisions, which is incremental and obviously difficult to communicate and agree with the counterparties, and it is the challenge we face today in our engagement with the clients. So that is the response of my question.
Thank you, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you first time, Osama. So Dr. Ahmed,
No worries, thank you.
Do you hear me? So you have written a paper and published it, and you sent it to the working group committee. So you talk about financial rate and economic rate, and actually we also discussed this. And we are in favor of economic rate, but reality probably saying that given the data, because you have moved away from contribution model, the survey, database or transaction-based data. Now the question is, can you shed us light on this idea that you have proposed in a paper from the conceptual basis point?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I'd like to thank AAOIFI for holding or organizing this event physically. Inshallah, it's going to be a sign and let's say hope that this pandemic will end shortly. Well, for the paper and for this topic, it's not a new debate. It's an old debate. It's a debate that is as old as the industry itself. And I think this debate started in the 80s and continues in the 90s and until now. And in the 90s, for example, the Islamic International Fiqh Academy called for replacing the interest rate benchmarking by Islamic or Sharia compliant alternatives. And from that time until now, there were a lot of suggestions. And the problem at the end of the day is that none of these suggestions were adopted. So if we want to wrap up a little bit, what were the suggestions and what were those trends? In fact, there were two trends in the classical, let's say, approach. The classical approach is that we need to find out or to create or to conceive an index that is linked to the real economy. And here there were, let's say, two trends. The first trend is that we have in one, let's say, one global index for the whole economy. And there were suggestions like the rate of dividend of Islamic bank deposits and investment accounts model. There were other suggestions like the inter-Islamic banks market index. And the second trend is that we would like to have one index per sector. For example, for the home financing, we will have an index for home financing based on the rental index. And in this second trend, we need to have for each sector in the economy an index that represents this sector so that we can stick to it. The problem with those suggestions, why weren't they adopted, is that Islamic financial institutions find it hard to adopt them in their pricing model. And believe me, this issue is very sensitive. I think it's the most sensitive issue in the whole Islamic finance industry. I had the opportunity to visit many countries and to work with the Islamic financial institutions in their pricing model. And I used to ask people, ordinary people from the street, when I met them, what do you think about Islamic financial institutions in your country? And what is outstanding is that I had most of the time the same expression in their own language, in their own dialect. They say it's the same. And when I tried to know, to deepen this reflection, I found out that this similarity in their minds is due to the pricing mechanisms that are similar. So I think this is the main issue that we have to focus on to differentiate the Islamic finance industry from the conventional finance industry. The second trend, this is the new trend, which appeared in due to the transition from LIBOR to RFR, is that we want to, and there were some suggestions that stipulate that we need to reconfigure and let's say the pricing model in the murabaha and in the let's say Islamic financial contracts. So it means that instead of reconfiguring or reconceiving indexes that are linked to a real economy, we will work on those contracts to reconceive their pricing models and mechanisms. In my paper, I try to answer this question, which is very important: why Islamic financial institutions are still using the interest rate benchmarking. In fact, that's the point, is that we need to have some adjustments in our business model so that our real economy benchmarks will be useful to those, let's say, to those Islamic financial institutions. Otherwise, since they are competing in hybrid financial systems, they are facing the competitiveness of conventional financial institutions. They have to attract deposits. They have to attract, let's say, investment account holders, sukuk holders. So they have to benchmark the interest rate indexes and benchmarks that are exist in the market. And this is the point in hybrid financial system. This is the point. This is roughly my or the summary of my paper. And to wrap it up, there are three trends. The approach or the trend that is adopted by IFM and the IOFI, I think this is the one that we need to encourage, to find Islamic Sharia compliant benchmarks. And we have to adjust the business models of Islamic financial institutions to accept those let's say those indexes to be competitive with the conventional financial institutions in hybrid financial systems. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jyoti. We are coming towards the end of our session, but I'll give one round, 1 minute, all panelists. But let me just summarize something of our recently concluded working group committee on this subject matter. And I'm chairing this one. So the issues that we are discussing and that is relevant is that, of course, that anything that you do, it has to be Sharia compliant. This is an absolute must. Then it has to be risk-free rate, but when it's a risk-free rate, I like Mustafa Adil, I would use the true opportunity cost. It has to be forward-looking, like all the panel members are saying. The question is financial market versus economic reality. The data issues that he talked about, is easier to get data from the financial market side rather than an economic side. Now we have to be concerned about the time value of money versus economic resources based model. Present versus future, we do not on the basis of time, money after money, but we look at economic resource, present versus future. How do you incorporate into the model? We have to be practical. We have to look at the data availability. We have to be also practical about the market acceptability, because IBOR died because there is no market acceptance. The frequency, how frequently we change this rate, that is also important. Geographical, jurisdiction based, as Adil and everyone is saying. So there will be rate for Bahrain, there will be rate for Pakistan and so on. We are not in a position to use international rate. LIBOR we use because all the banks are in London, right? But IBOR failed, one of the reasons because all the banks are spread around the different parts of the Muslim world. So that was a big problem. Single currency we start with, not multiple currency. Then we try to, transition into other currencies. It has to be transparent, no hanky-panky. I mean, by that, I mean, many often, I'm an academician, we write a lot of things. I mean, the main message gets blurred into the econometric or mathematical model. So we have to be transparent so that the industry can understand something that is practicable, something people understand, both financing side and also borrowing side. And there has to be a tolerable volatility. Excess GORAR is not allowed. So these are some of the points we agreed on in our working group meeting. Our DG is here. He is always present in all the meetings. Having said this, I want to go back to our first panelist. Aznan, you have 1 minute if you have any final thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Prof. I still believe that even though using the risk-free rate is acceptable with certain modification, like what done by IFM for that matter, I believe that moving forward, we should propose our own benchmark rate where it is forward-looking basis. And I still believe that the best way is to benchmark again the economic performance rather than on financial asset for that matter. I know the data is quite difficult for us to gather, but I believe that if you were talking about reflecting the real economics, reflecting the real rate that we desire to have, and I believe that is the way forward for Islamic finance, even for conventional as well, is the best for the country and for the humankind in general, for that matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aznan. Next, Brother Islal.
Yes, I think, of course, we have good deliberation on the Islamic and things have been identified. So one other thing is what I think Mustafa also mentioned, totally agree. We have to see, the currency. If you have, which currency, if you have dollar, for example, and if you have two rates, then it will lead to arbitrage. And that is one issue which regulators also face. So I think that's element one has to see. And when it comes to opportunity cost, naturally in Islamic finance, we don't really use the opportunity cost. In our documentation also, in all standards we use, generally it's the actual, if there is a cost element which happens. So we can't bring in the opportunity cost in this, so that has to be in mind. So these are, some of the points which I'm sure we have all discussed, but in my point of view are very important. When we're looking at it, probably if you house it and with one regulator, and use it as a, that probably could be the approach. And as you mentioned earlier, Workpoint had a workshop, these issues were discussed, and I think one thing which came was really, maybe it can start with certain jurisdiction, and then with that model we move forward. So I think that could be
Excellent. Dr. Walid,
Yes, so Chairman, I think that we have to go back to the essence of the problem. Why did we end up using conventional benchmarks in the first place? It is because obviously the regulators require all IFIs to adopt the same benchmarks in the relevant market, but actually it is because the activities of the IFI mimic to a great extent the activities of the conventional bank. So there is no logical reason for IFIs to divert from those benchmarks used for activities which are very, very similar. So that obviously is a problem. So we have a challenge. The challenge is to convince the central bankers that IFIs are different and they shouldn't be subject to rules and regulations that at the end of the day lead them to act and behave in the same way as conventional institutions. So if we are done this, and I take this from Dr. Adnan's comment, and when he said, the challenge is to convince central bankers. So we don't have Islamic central bankers anyway. We only have 1 or 2 in the world. So globally, that is a big issue. How to convince them? At the same time, the Sharia issue would become really a less challenging issue, because if we are able to overcome the problem of having to deal with the central bankers, and they are convinced that IFI is inherently different than conventional banks, then the Sharia issue becomes really a small issue, because we will be able to link our reference rates to real economy. We can do all the things that Mustafa talked about. We can actually, I was wondering if that's a question actually for Mr. Mustafa and for the working group, if all the factors that he mentioned could actually brought together and pulled together to produce a reference rate.
thank you. Brother Osama, final thoughts in 1 minute.
Dr. Q, I just want to highlight that there are a lot of discussions about coming up with the alternate rate. I just want to sort of highlight the immediate problem also, because we need to get into a smooth transition from the LIBOR to RFR. So that is the bigger problem at this point in time, and I think a lot of focus should be paid on that, so that the contracts are valid, they are smoothly transitioned into the new space, and then obviously we can work on creating something in the new regime which is based around risk-free rate or alternate rate, rather than focusing on what has been done in the LIBOR space, because going forward the new regime is focused on ARR. So that's the point I want to make as an ending comment.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Zoti. Can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I have 2 recommendations. First, we need to start with a benchmark that can have an impact in the industry. Second thing is that it's not a one-shot effort. It's a process. It's a continuous process. We need to have this benchmark, then start to upgrade it, and to make more efforts about, let's say, make this benchmark become known and applicable in different contexts and different countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I do not see the questions
Professor
online.
There's a question from, there's a hand raised actually from Mr. Adnan Yusuf.
Okay.
He's virtually with us. Mr. Adnan Yusuf, can you hear us well? Okay, possibly we can proceed.
So anybody from the audience, any question directed to any of the panelists? Dr. Ahmed? You don't have any question. How about Brother Omar Ansari? You have to say something. Conclude.
Hello.
Very much, Dr. Kabir.
Hello, how are you?
This is
I raised my hand several times this session and the previous sessions. Okay, now can I get in? Okay. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
yes, we can hear you.
We
We
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Well, first of all, let me thank you, all of you, for today's session and for yesterday. And today's session, the first one, I was very interested also to raise certain issues. But this, we should not complicate ourselves on the LIBOR. I remember in the 70s, interest rate was close to 20% when I used to work in the banking. The reason why the LIBOR has not affected too many institutions for the past 15 years because the interest rate was very low. And LIBOR was, created for the interbank for short term, not for to fix, assets. But later on, we use it for the syndication transaction, especially when we are lending in foreign currencies. So I think that we should segregate each countries. They will have their own internal, what we call it, interbank placements. And we should also segregate the countries which has a restriction on their currencies to move out or to deal outside. For example, many banks and many institutions and many countries, they don't deal with dollars or pound sterling. They don't let their institution to deal. They deal with the central bank within these countries. Furthermore, I believe that when I want to place dollar, excess dollar, for example, the Gulf countries are open to borrow as well as to lend in local currencies, in foreign currencies. But therefore, we should create, like the LIBOR, BIBOR we created in Bahrain, SIBOR in Singapore on the dollars, we should create what we call it, the LIBOR indicate rates within one country, especially that we are dealing in currencies which does not belong to us, it belongs to the others. So they are the ones which they dictate the rate of it. Because if our rate is higher than the international rates, people will come and just place money with you, and then you will have problem to place the money in the international market because the international market will not accept a higher rate. So I believe that we should create from AAOIFI a kind of a committee to collect research and everything and submit it to a technical as well as what we call it professionals to draw lines. Because remember that we are talking about currencies of other countries, either euro or pound sterling or dollar. Because local currencies, it is easy to what we call it, fix it. Furthermore, in the Gulf, if we fix the dinar lower than the dollar, what will happen is people will convert the dinar to dollar and they will place it dollars. And we have to know each country's, their regulations. As I said, that Gulf countries are free to deal in foreign currencies, in local currencies. For example, in Pakistan, no, Pakistanis, they will not be allowed to deal in foreign currencies unless they have transaction, either they are importing goods or something. Otherwise, they will deal in their local currencies. So therefore, whether we like it or we don't like it, normally or always our rates will link to the international. That's why when the dollar is going down, you find all the Gulf countries, they lower their rates. Not because their economy is in a condition where they need interest rate to go down, but because they have to follow. Otherwise, people will convert, go to the higher. This is my kind of inputs is I need AAOIFI to take that initiatives, collect all these things and have a center whereby people can get the benefit out of it. And thank you very much. This is only comments. And Omar, also, I have another comment is, since now we complete 30 years, it is advisable that we give award to the people who has contributed to AAOIFI from the beginning. Because today in the morning, I saw our friend Noor Abed, and I used to work with Noor Abed on a few of the standard in the beginning of AAOIFIs. And I think that this is a time whereby I think that we should give a kind of recognition to all the people who has already contributed to AAOIFI from the beginning. Once again, thank you very much. Sorry to create problem for you. And this is just my own personal opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adnan Yusuf, sir. We always learn from you. Thanks for both very valid comments. Let me quickly take the second comment first. Yes, inshallah, sir, we want to do something to recognize the services of our patrons who actually served this whole industry in last 30 years. We are inshallah planning to do a report on 30 years performance of AAOIFI as well. So inshallah, with that launching as soon as possible, maybe next Sharia conference, inshallah, we will do that. Thank you very much, sir. Something like this was in our mind, but thanks to make it very clear, and inshallah, it will be done. With regard to your very valuable comments on the real mechanism and the real market realities as to how these things happen, sir. Again, thank you very much. It is noted. What we are doing right now, we have established the working group under AAOIFI Governance and Ethics Board, but even AAOIFI Sharia Board is interested in the project, and they have held one meeting with us on the combined basis. And then they nominated our learned Sheikh Aznan Hassan to be part of that working group. And then we started collaborating with the international regulators on that point. We wrote a letter, the Sharia Board, on behalf of Sharia Board chairman, to the regulators around the globe that this is an important issue and we need to work to find a real solution. Some of them have given positive responses. We wrote to IFSB to be a part of this project, and we proposed them to make it a joint project. They said, as of now, they are more willing to make it a collaborative project rather than a joint project. So they nominated 2 of their members to be part of the working group. Alhamdulillah, you can see Brother Ijlal sitting with us. Thanks for his guidance every time. We have ISRA with us, Dr. Sami Soelam, IsDB Institute and IRTI with us. Dr. Sami Soelam and his team are contributing a lot. We have ISRA on board. Dr. Anwar Usman is contributing. We have Refinitiv on board based on their experience in this industry, particularly having the earlier experience of having the rate. And we have some very good experts led by Dr. Kabir Hassan and others. So the group of experts is there. We are trying to find good models and good core principles that should be there. And yes, it will be only the first step. After that, there is a long way to go. First, you develop the core principles, then you select the model and test the model on the empirical basis. And then you actually try to convince the regulators and the others to actually make it a reality. Thank you very much. We'll take into consideration all your points in the next working group meeting as to how to consider particularly the aspects of international financial politics and the rate related techniques of fund movement, etc. So we'll consider these aspects as well, and this is very important to be considered if we want to do anything in particular. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Brother Omar. Brother Islal, you wanted to say something on consumer?
Yeah, I think one aspect is that also, the consumer, i.e. the corporate also, they have to be really also be discussed, this element, these changes, how they'll work. For example, yesterday we published, this IFN published, so AAOIFI also, contributed. So there is a report on thought on ESGs. And one of the things which I sort of use from Standard Chartered Bank, they have a report on net zero, is the element of MNCs, how they are going to deal. So I think those links are there. I mean, between, the supplier and, the manufacturers we have, in OIC countries, supplying even from Bangladesh, other places. You have, which are supplying, either garments or other sort of goods. Turkey is a big market for export also. So these are, I think, something which we have to also see, maybe input from, their side, the controllers or, from the corporate sector to see how they see it.
Okay, thank you very much. This basically concludes our session. I thank the esteemed panelist, Dr. Aznan Hassan. He's a big name Sharia scholar. We have Dr. Walid Hegazi, big name lawyer. We have Islal Albi. He has been in the industry for a long period of time. We have my academic now converting into Dr. Ahmed Tahiri Zuti and also Sama Omar. And please forgive me any shortcoming when I was trying to moderating this session. I seek your forgiveness, and let's pray that we learn from this deliberation. If there was a mistake or misunderstanding we had, I hope, and if you have a chance to, you can go through the video, can clarify that misunderstanding or confusion I myself did during this deliberation. So thank you very much. It's lunchtime. I think lunch is waiting for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kabir. I think this is one of the very important session, and I think it was very well covered, whole range of topics. It's a very comprehensive topic itself. And inshallah, the discussions will be taken to the next level in terms of how we can work together between the industry bodies as well as the alternative rate that AAOIFI is proposing under the leadership of the AAOIFI Governance and Ethics Board when it comes to the Islamic rate. So with that, let me thank you, Dr. Kabir, for chairing this very well. I mean, I think this was one of the sessions where we have more the speakers physically present. So thank you for joining us, Brother Ijlal Alvi, CEO of IIFM. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Walid Hijazi. Thank you, AAOIFI Governance and Ethics Board member, as Deputy Chairman, sorry. We are online. Thank you very much, Sheikh Aznan Hassan, for joining us virtually. Brother Usama Umar, Director, Standard Chartered, and Dr. Ahmed Tahir Jyoti. We thank you very much for sharing your experience and knowledge through this very important session. So thank you. With that, we hope we can have more and more speakers, inshallah, physically present with us at the next gathering, inshallah. And we will see more developments when it comes to this particular standard as well by then. Certainly. Thank you.